In Act 5, then, when Hamlet returns to Denmark, there's a couple things going on. So, a lot of Shakespeare scholars believe that whatever time has had to pass between the events of Act 4 and Act 5, and some time must have passed because it's going to take a bit for Hamlet to go by boat from Denmark. Even he doesn't get to England, but close to England and then back again. It's going to take some time. And the thought is that when Hamlet returns, there's a bit of a maturity that's taken place. The last lines we've heard from him on the stage, we've seen these letters that he's written, but the last lines on the stage are, he's calling for blood here. So when he returns here at Ophelia's grave, his conversation about death is one that deserves some conversation. So there's this comedic scene between these two gravediggers, these jesters, who are irreverently mocking the very somber events that are taking place as they dig a grave for Ophelia, unbeknownst to Hamlet, because he doesn't know yet that Ophelia has died. And he now has these kinds of these thoughts around death. And here's what he says. He says, "To what base uses we may return, Horatio? Why may not imagination trace the noble dust of Alexander till he find it stopping a bunghole," which is like a cork in this case in a barrel of beer. And so Hamlet thinks, okay, well, if Alexander dies, and Alexander the Great, the conqueror of the known world, if Alexander dies and Alexander's buried and Alexander's body turns to dust and the earth is what we use to make loam out of and loam is used to make these corks, then is it possible that some of Alexander gets wrapped up here in the production of corks for wine bottles or beer barrels? It's not a particularly noble use of the body. Certainly, The Lion King is very heavily indebted to Hamlet, but its vision of the circle of life in which the antelope eat the grass and we eat the antelope and we die and become the grass and the antelope eat the grass and we eat the antelope feels much more generative, and it's the circle of life after all. It moves us all. And yet here, Hamlet seems to have a more realistic vision of the fact that death is a great leveler. His little rhyme here about Caesar has him turn to drywall. And he says that earth, the dust that was Caesar, at one point kept the whole world in awe, but now it's just used to patch up a hole in a leaky house to expel the winter's flaw. The implications of this vision of death deserve some conversation. Is Hamlet in this place being nihilistic? Is he being too morose? Is there a comforting realism here that he is suggesting? You'll notice, of course, that in this conversation on death, Hamlet doesn't mention the afterlife at all. He's moved from a Judeo-Christian vision of the afterlife to this kind of undiscovered country vision of the afterlife, and now he doesn't mention it. Now he's just talking about bodily death, perhaps because Hamlet is feeling that this is now coming within his orbit. I wonder if when we're a bit older, and I include myself in this too, but I wonder if when we're a bit older and we begin to succumb to the body's decay, what our vision of death will be. Now in a place where hopefully, unless we've been touched by personal experience, it's not likely that many of us are thinking that this is around the corner for us. And yet Hamlet, perhaps now that he's anticipating pushing this forward, setting this chain of events into motion, maybe his vision of death is amending a little bit. And maybe this is the kind of comfort that he needs, that even men of tremendous legacy are forced to go through this humility of dying. And that in that death is a loss of control. And also, as we'll see in just a little bit, a loss of how your legacy gets expressed to the rest of the world.